yeah, it's been a little bit slow, but that's good because folks have been able to audit, better audit their work and know that things going up.
Yeah, well, it's gonna get busy too, so.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think,
Everyone's coming.
I think,
I didn't hear of anybody. Normally I get like.
yeah, yeah, I got responses back from everybody except for, I think Amy, that they were either attending or virtually or in person.
No? Good morning, everyone. Looking around the virtual room real quick just to see if you can hear me. Great, okay.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. It is 9:03 on May 25th, and you are in the right in-person and virtual room. We will give folks another 2 minutes and we will promptly start at 9:05.
Good morning, everybody. This is Craig Anderson. I'm the committee chair of the Health Insurance Marketplace Advisory Committee. Just want to welcome everybody to our spring meeting. If you're online, that's me at the very end of the table. I feel like I'm a mile away from you all, but hopefully you can hear me and see me okay. Dawn sent out the packet earlier this week on Tuesday. You all should have received that if you're online. And I just want to note on the agenda that there are asterisks next to those items that are on the committee's work plan. And I also want to say, just by way of beginning of this meeting, that we have a pretty packed agenda today. And so we'll go through that. There was a lot of information on the bridge plan and the Medicaid unwinding, and as well as some legislative updates. And we have 2 new committee members that we're going to welcome this morning. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chicky to do a roll call.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning again, everybody. Chicky Flowers. I'm the director of the Oregon Health Insurance Marketplace, and I am sitting beside Craig, so I am also another mile away. And my pronouns are she, her, hers, Shakanya, and I will start with a roster. If you are in the meeting, if you can please indicate if you're here in person or joining by phone and or video. That would be fantastic. Chair Craig Anderson,
Here in person.
Gladys Boutwell, Ron Gallaudet.
On video.
Thank you, Ron. Mary Beth Guarino,
Here in person?
Paul Harmon.
Here virtually.
Thank you. Vice Chair Lindsay Hopper.
Good morning, here on Teams video.
Thank you, Lindsay, and good morning. Shannon Lee.
Here in person?
Joni Moore.
Here virtually.
Thank you, Joni. Danielle Nichols.
Here virtually.
Holly Sorensen.
Good morning, here over video.
Director Andrew Stolfi.
Good morning. I'm here on Teams.
Sukinai.
Here on video.
Thank you. Drew Tarab.
Virtually here.
Neshoba Temperley.
Here through video.
Thank you. Chair Anderson, we have 14 out of our 15 members currently present, so thank you.
All right, I want to remind everybody about our meeting protocols. And as a reminder, the Marketplace and the HIMAC is committed to a safe and inclusive meeting for all attendees. Please do not hesitate to offer your perspective and ask any questions. If you notice any unacceptable behavior, please bring that to Chickie's attention. The next slide. And to the extent you're comfortable, please be on camera as much as you can. Please raise your hand either in person or virtually, or if you'd like to, you can also put a note into the chat if you want to get into the conversation. And then lastly, there is a captions feature if needed. All right, so our first order of business this morning.
Yes. So my apologies to everybody, and Inez, my apologies. I missed your name. I accidentally skipped it. I am working on my coffee, so my apologies. Inez Kemper.
Present by video.
Thank you, Inez, and apologies again for the third and fourth time.
We did have one minor adjustment to the minutes on page 4, the Marketplace Transition Proposed Plans, bullet 2. We changed COWM to CWM, which is the most current version of that acronym. So that is the only change, and the change is noted in the packet that's attached to the meeting invite and on the web. So I just wanted to make sure that we changed this yesterday. So just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Just an update to an acronym. Okay, thanks for pointing that out, Don. Any discussion about the minutes from last meeting? Not hearing any. Can I get a motion to approve?
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that. Holly here.
Ollie, thank you. And then let's say aye in person in the room, or you can do it virtually with your hand or just typing it into the chat. So all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
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 All right, thank you. So next we're going to welcome 2 new committee members. So you all should have received an email from Chickie notifying us all that we have 2 new committee members, and Victor and Chickie and I had the pleasure of having phone calls with each of the new members. And from my perspective, I'm very excited to have them both. I think they bring unique perspectives that we can learn from on the committee. So that was a very good to have those conversations. First, I'd like to introduce Danielle Nichols, and Danielle is a medical assistant for the Oregon Medical Group and Lane Community College and has been for the last 16 years. And she hopes to bring her expertise and her experience as an assister to the marketplace and to the committee. So Danielle, anything you'd like to add by way of introduction? Anything about your background that you'd like to talk about?
No, I think that's everything. Yeah, the last, I think 6 years I've been a community assister with Oregon Health Plan and then medical assistant for 16. So I see both sides of the insurance stuff. So.
Yeah, that's good to see both sides for sure. So thank you, Danielle. And then the other new member is Shannon Lee, and she's here in person. And Shannon is an entrepreneur and human development expert. She's also been a marketplace member for a number of years. So with that, Shannon, anything you'd like to say by way of introduction?
Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and to represent members of the general public and the end user, as well as to offer any support or ideas that I can to the program. I'm very grateful to have been a user for a while, and I'm looking forward to supporting the ongoing success and improvement. Thank you.
Good. We'll move on to the next. All right, so as we do with these meetings, we like to have a federal health policy update from Stephanie Kennan. And so she's here. I saw her online. I'll hand this over to her. And go ahead, Stephanie. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Let me start by talking about something you probably are tired of hearing about in the news, but it's hanging over all of our heads in Washington, which is the debt ceiling. The House is going out today for their recess. They've been told to stay close to be called back. The Senate was told that last week when they left, and still we don't have a deal. But just to give you a little bit of an idea of what they're talking about, Speaker McCarthy will only go along with a debt ceiling increase if there are other things that are attached to it. They were talking about increasing defense and holding spending at 2020 levels for everything else. That would mean cuts. They now seem to be talking about a freeze on spending. Probably still an increase on defense, which means there's going to have to be a little cutting somewhere. But the word from last night was now we're on to a freeze. So that's slightly different. The other issue that is still sitting on out there that is really difficult for Democrats is work requirements for Medicaid and or food stamps. Depending on who you talk to, it's only food stamps or it's just Medicaid or it's both. So they're still on the mix. The problem that the speaker has is that he's going to have Republican defections regardless of what the deal is. And the magic number to pass something in the House is 218. He can only really afford 4 Republicans defecting unless they also pick up Democrats, and that's unclear at this point. The magic number for votes in the Senate is 60. And while McCarthy and Biden are negotiating because honestly, those are the two principal players, and something has to move in the House first before it can move in the Senate. The Senate leaders will be brought in towards the end when they feel like they do have a deal to make sure it's something that can pass the Senate. I was running around the Senate yesterday, and on the staff level, they were all like, yeah, we don't see this happening anytime soon. So it'll be interesting as closer we get to June 1st, if the pressure really makes people start to come to some conclusions here. The White House staff was told earlier this week to go help Treasury figure out some new ways to shift around things so that we don't run out of money on June 1st. And so far, no one's come up with any bright ideas that would be practical or wouldn't cause a lawsuit. So June 1st is known as X Day around here. So stay tuned for that. And the next thing I want to cover is that the Congressional Budget Office published a health insurance coverage projections for 2023 to 2033, which is very hard to say for some reason. And the reason the Congressional Budget Office projections are important is, as you know, they are an arm of Congress, and when bills get scored to determine whether they spend or save, CBO is the one who has to make those decisions and justify them. So what they project on health insurance is really important for a number of things that you may want to do on the federal level related to the marketplace or Medicare or Medicaid or CHIP. So during the period of COVID and the pandemic, low-income people saw the largest gains in coverage and the largest drops in the share of those who lacked insurance. CBO has made changes to their model so they can actually look at race and ethnicity. And during that period, by CBO estimates now, the share of Hispanics who were uninsured is around 15%, which is the highest of all the groups they examined. CBO, not surprisingly, is projecting that over the next year and a half, there'll be a decline in Medicaid enrollment, and they project that 6.2 million across the country will leave Medicaid and become uninsured. If the enhanced subsidies expire after 2025, as they are scheduled to do so, CBO projects 4.9 million people will become uninsured and not enroll in the marketplace. They expect that by 2033, the share of uninsured in the country will be about 10.1%. So we're starting to go backwards. The CBO estimates that private health insurance premiums will increase by an average of 5.9% in 2024 and 2025. That, in part, they say, is reflecting kind of a bounce back on medical spending from suppressed levels during the pandemic. They project much lower growth rates later, but in 2026 and 2027, they are estimating the growth rate to be about 5.7, down from 5.9 in their estimate. And they estimate that growth will be 4.6% from 2028 to 2033. Now, that's a long ways off and could change, but at least they're starting to see a downward trend. They expect that by 2033, subsidies will be about 4% of the gross domestic product. And in that case, when they talk about subsidies, they're talking about not only subsidies for the marketplace, but the way in which the Medicare premium is somewhat subsidized. In early fall, they're going to publish a much more detailed analysis and expand on how far down they can drill about what's happening to who, and what's driving those coverage issues. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve did a survey and found that 28% of those who responded say they skipped some form of health care last year because they couldn't afford it. And that was up from 4% from the year before. Now, we all know that there could be lots of factors into going into skipping healthcare, whether you're insured, how much money you make, what other pressures are in the family budget, et cetera. But the Federal Reserve was flagging the 4% rate as something that's worth watching. So I suspect, not in this Congress, but perhaps in the next Congress, there's going to have to be some reexamination on what we are looking at when it comes to coverage. If the figures, if premiums go up and the enrollments go down, then they're going to want to try to do something. So we'll have to see what happens. One issue I want to flag for you all is pharmacy benefit manager reform. I don't think I'm joking when I say just about every member of Congress is co-sponsoring or trying to draft their own PBM reform bill. I won't go into all the details. I'll just say that essentially they're focusing on a couple of things when it relates to PBMs. One is transparency and having a better idea of what's going on with how they determine prices, the rebates for any program, including private insurers. And they're also focusing on trying to ban the practice of spread pricing, which is essentially when a PBM charges more than the pharmacy is going to get reimbursed. Just to give you an idea of how busy Congress has been on this issue, the Senate Judiciary Committee has reported out a bill that's focused on the Federal Trade Commission. The Senate Commerce Committee has reported out a bill. Senate Finance Committee has held 2 hearings, and we believe they're working on a bill. Over in the House, the House Energy and Commerce Committee has a bill that's been reported to it from the Subcommittee on Health. And that bill was reported to the full committee with virtually everyone on board with it. So all this means we know we're going to have something on PBM reform. There's no vehicle yet for it to pass in Congress. The 2 bodies are not coordinating with each other. But at some point, we will probably have a healthcare package that needs to go, and that is likely to be towards the end of the year. In the Senate Majority Leader has said that he wants to put a package on drug pricing, which would be more than PBM reform, on the floor sometime this year. It's very fluid what would be in that, but clearly PBM reform was probably going to be the center of it, and it may end up being the only piece that everybody agrees on. And also, I'll just say over at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, they're already investigating PBM business practices, and they just broadened that investigation to include a couple of group purchasing organizations that hold PBM rebate contracts. So there's a lot of work going on the middleman. I was in a conversation yesterday where somebody said, "Oh yeah, PBMs, they're this year's villain of the healthcare sector." So that's taking a lot of time. I also want to address appropriations issues. This is the time of year when the House and Senate start to work on appropriation bills, which, as you know, are important to keep everything funded and moving. With the debt ceiling hanging over everybody's heads, the House decided not to move forward with 3 bills that they were ready to go with. And the appropriations process is a very slow process, and a delay like this, even if it's a week or 2 or maybe longer, really means that this ties up all the politics and the things that people want to do. And it's going to be very, very messy when they finally do start to do appropriations. In the Senate, they've already run into a kind of a massive issue. In the agriculture, FDA, and related agencies bills, apparently the Democrats have enough votes to put something in related to FDA issues that the Republicans do not want. So they've decided they're going to skip that bill completely. That means they're going to have to figure out how to fund ag and FDA and the related agencies through a continuing resolution of some sort. All of this argues for the fact that we may come up to the end of the fiscal year, which is in September, and have to hammer out some sort of continuing resolution. And they may then do another continuing resolution in December and just punt it to a year, but it's just going to be messy. And when things like that happen, it means nothing else moves. So it'll be a difficult end of the year. And the last couple of things I'll mention is the unwinding from the public health emergency has been very confusing, particularly in the area of telehealth. The DEA put out an announcement that the flexibilities related to telehealth prescribing for certain substances would end on a certain date. We got right up to that date and they said, oops, never mind, we're going to do a 6-month extension because we got so many comments on our proposed rule that we don't have time to go through them. So give us 6 months. CMS put out guidelines on telehealth, focusing on Medicare in particular. And they thought they were perfectly clear, and they now are having a lot of people come back to them with so many questions that they may have to revise their guidance in a significant way to be clear. So more to come on that. And last, I'll just mention that CMS put out a proposed rule to extend coverage for Medicaid CHIP-in in the marketplace if someone qualifies for the DACA recipients. And they expect to finalize that in July. So that's a regulation we'll be looking for. So, and with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. This is Chicky, and Drew put in the chat a question for you. And to read it out loud, Stephanie, does the CBO dive into any state-specific metrics? Would a state like Oregon expect a 10% uninsured rate?
They have not yet in what they published yesterday. They did not go into state level specifics. I think that they're going to try to when they publish their more expanded report. And I don't know that Oregon would expect a 10% increase in 10 years because you've done other things in your Medicaid program. But I think states that have not expanded Medicaid may have at least a 10% increase.
Mary Beth has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the subsidies and the appropriations. Is there any conversation about the expiration of the ARPA subsidies and those expanded subsidies in the marketplace?
Not this year, because they don't go up until 2025, if I remember correctly. Next year, probably there'll be some conversations about it. 2024 is going to be a very weird year, as if 2023 isn't weird. Whenever you have a presidential election, members of Congress act very partisan, but even more so the closer you get to a big election. And if it isn't done early, it probably won't get done. They'll have to figure out, whether they do kind of a compromise of extend, but we'll come back and revisit later, or they just don't do anything, and then somebody's got to come back in and do it after the election. In 2024, we expect that the lame duck session, and there will be one, is going to be very busy, and depending on who wins, that may foretell the policies that will get extended, but it's going to be close. I wish I could say Congress thinks ahead, but I like to say Congress is more like kids at college. You don't open up the book until the test.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Any other questions for Stephanie? Well, thank you, Stephanie. You covered quite a bit there. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Take
Okay.
care.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Okay, so next on our agenda, we have Tim Sweeney virtually. He's going to go through an update on the basic health program, what's going on with CMS as well. And there's a lot of information in this particular presentation. So Tim, we'll try to keep up, but if people need to stop you along the way, we'll just do that and clarify things as we go. But thank you, Tim. Go ahead.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tim Sweeney with I'm the lead policy analyst for the OHA team working to develop a basic health program, and really appreciate y'all having me back to provide some updates on our ongoing policy and program development work for the basic health program. I think, for today's presentation, I'll start with some BHP 101 to make sure everyone is back up to speed. I know we have some new members and some folks probably, I think, just joined in January when I was last here. And then move into some updates from our ongoing conversations with CMS over the last few months and how recent guidance has influenced our intended implementation plans. As part of that, I'll revisit the task force recommendations and discuss how we've modified how the CMS guidance has informed our approach. And finally, we'll go over some recent actuarial analysis that's been completed and that shows how Oregon's current implementation plan is expected to affect the individual market. I'm hoping that there will be plenty of time for a robust conversation at the end. And while I'd love to get through all the slides before we dive too far, as was mentioned, I certainly welcome clarifying questions throughout the presentation. So please do stop me. I maybe can't see hands raised. So if there's a reason to stop, feel free to interrupt me if I don't see you and call on somebody. So diving in, I want to start with a bit of a BHP 101 refresher course. The last time I was here was January, and I know not everybody is living and breathing this issues like I am. So first, with a reminder of really the impetus for the creation of the program, and I think that this sort of piggybacks well on what Stephanie just talked about around the uninsured rate and projections going forward. As a result of the public health emergencies, continuous coverage provisions, and Medicaid, Oregon achieved a record low uninsured rate. And really, this is in large part due to coverage gains among adults with income between 138 and 200% of the poverty level. They went from having the lowest coverage rate of any income group in the state to having a coverage rate that's much more on par with low and moderate income ranges. So as you can see on the chart, and just as a reminder, on the side you can see what the federal poverty level means for, or what 138 and 200% of the federal poverty is for different family sizes. So this is still a fairly low income population, $20,000 to $30,000 for an individual, and again they were much more likely to go without health insurance prior to the public health emergency than other income groups. I think we can skip ahead 2 slides because this was sort of a mistaken one that covers everything in the slides around it. So in the wake of these coverage gains, the legislature in 2022 passed House Bill 4035 that, among other things, directed the state to develop a new permanent coverage option for adults in this income range, 138 to 200% of poverty. As we mentioned, the largest gains of any income group. The bill created a task force to develop the structure of this program with goals to preserve coverage gains, maximize federal funds, and to have a program that is delivered by CCOs that covers the same benefits with no cost for enrollees as they are getting in Medicaid. The bill also sets as goals the desire to pay higher rates to providers than under Medicaid, and that if possible, the state should seek to offer eligible consumers a choice between this new program and their existing marketplace plans. These last 2 goals of the legislation turned out to be the most difficult, and the task force ultimately included recommendations in their final report to keep pursuing these ideas in the future, but acknowledging that they would not be part of the initial program implementation. The next slide shows really a graph of how this new coverage option would fit in during the redetermination process. While most OHP members, and so I think that there's another presentation on the redeterminations, but in the wake of the expiration of the public health emergency, we're redetermining OHP eligibility for everybody on the program. While most OHP members are expected to remain eligible and remain enrolled in OHP, some number of people will be ineligible and transition to other forms of coverage, including individual coverage on the marketplace. Those who meet the income requirements for a basic health program would have this new option, which is shown alongside other coverage options that we expect folks to migrate to. So the next slide shows really what we expect this program to look like. We expect to have enrollment of about a little more than 100,000 people, with most of these individuals, about 55,000, coming from Medicaid. We expect another 36,000 individuals will move into the BHP from the marketplace, and that about 11,000 uninsured individuals will enroll in the BHP. While folks coming from Medicaid will be transitioned from OHP upon program implementation, movement from the marketplace and really from folks who are uninsured will not happen in one fell swoop, but rather over the coming few years after program launch, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in some future slides. And lastly, in terms of the 101, before diving into the program a little bit, this next slide talks about what a basic health program is. And The BHP is a federal program established in the Affordable Care Act, specifically for folks with income under 200% of the poverty level who would otherwise be eligible for marketplace tax credits. States create a BHP by developing a Section 1331 blueprint, which documents the state's program design choices and describes the structure and our compliance with federal rules. The state then receives federal funding to cover the BHP population based on the amount that the federal government would have paid in the form of marketplace tax credits, cost sharing reductions, and just in general subsidies towards the individual market. I'll pause here for a second. I know some folks are newer to the HIMAC and may be less familiar with the BHP work, and so make sure that all that made sense, and if there's any really critical questions to go through before I move on. Okay. So pivoting to Oregon's current implementation plan, and the next slide shows, I want to briefly revisit the task force recommendations related to this timeline. Initially, the task force recommended the state pursue a phased approach to implementation that would enable us to both move quickly while also minimizing disruption. In the first phase, Oregon would implement a temporary eligibility expansion of Medicaid to keep people with income in the 138 to 200% range covered by OHP while developing the permanent program for this cohort. We called this phase 0 because it's really intended to keep people exactly where they are until the permanent program is launched. Next, in phase 1, we plan to move only people who are already covered by the Oregon Health Plan and who are in this income range into the BHP. Basically, the folks who were covered in phase 0 would then move into the BHP. Again, intended to keep folks on OHP and in the marketplace where they are or were. And finally, phase 2 would be the full implementation of the BHP. And in this phase, people would be able to apply for BHP coverage if they don't have health insurance, and will be able to move from marketplace coverage into the BHP. Now, about a month ago, CMS told us that we cannot implement this phased approach exactly like we imagined. Phase 0 is still happening exactly as planned. In April, CMS approved Oregon's waiver amendment to expand Medicaid to keep people on OHP even when they have income in this BHP range. This amendment is in place now and will enable people to retain their OHP coverage, again, in this income range until the BHP launches in 2024. However, CMS concluded that they did not have the authority to approve a BHP that did not allow all eligible people to enroll, basically that middle phase on the previous slide. So when Oregon launches the BHP, it must be available to anyone eligible for the program, not just people moving from OHP. However, as mentioned on the slide, the reality of how the federal marketplace's auto re-enrollment function works means that the transition of consumers from the marketplace will happen over the course of 3 years instead of all at once. So the next slide dives into a little bit more detail about what that means. When the BHP launches in the middle of 2024, eligible people who are not already on OHP will be able to enroll in the program, but it won't happen automatically. Folks in this income cohort who are covered by a marketplace plan would have to take action to enroll in the BHP, either by updating their marketplace application or by applying directly through the one system, just like somebody would for Medicaid for OHP. Because some marketplace enrollees automatically re-enroll in their current plan from 1 year to the next without updating their application, full migration into the BHP is expected to take up to 3 years from 2024 until plan year 2027. So through the open enrollment period in 2026. This is a shift from our initial plan. As such, there are some operational implications of these changes, which are shown on the next slide. For state systems, it means that we must be ready to process new applications and not solely move folks who are already enrolled on OHP. OHA must also consider the potential for enrollees coming from the marketplace or or who don't have health insurance when building our capitation rates for this first year. CCOs and marketplace plans will also experience the rollout differently. CCOs will have to be ready to accept new members in 2024, and marketplace plans will likely see guidance from the state to inform ongoing rate development. And I know that some of y'all were probably involved in a conversation that we had with the marketplace carriers about a week and a half ago on this topic. Communication strategies will be very important to minimize confusion among consumers and make sure folks understand the implications of updating their marketplace application, or how to remain in their current marketplace plan for the rest of the year if that's their preference. We don't have a strategy set out yet, but we're certainly going to develop one and are in the process of doing that. On the next slide, Oregon is also working with CMS and Treasury to obtain clear guidance, so we know what's happening on their end. We're working with CMS to develop assumptions for how marketplace enrollees in the BHP income range might respond, and then to develop enrollment expectations to inform guidance to carriers. From a consumer standpoint, we're working with our federal partners to ensure minimal financial risk to those who remain in their existing marketplace plan, and we've gotten at least a verbal response from Treasury and from CMS that folks who do remain in their marketplace plan instead of moving to the BHP would not face the repayment of any tax credits that they receive. They would be able to stay where they are until they decide that when they are staying there in their marketplace plan, that they won't be penalized. And then also working with them to ensure that folks who do move to the BHP are swiftly disenrolled from their marketplace coverage, so as to avoid them having to keep paying monthly premiums or avoid the potential of repayment of tax credits. We're working with CMS to understand how they're going to help with that process. And we're also working hard to ensure that state systems are connected to federal systems in a manner that makes this transition as smooth as possible. In addition to the phased approach to enrollment.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. This is Craig. Do you mind if I interrupt you? Just
No,
momentarily at
please
this
do.
point?
Please
Yeah,
do.
just so you mentioned that this is a little different than what we expected, and I just want to make sure I'm following the change from what we expected.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the BHP will go into effect sometime in 2024. So there's no date certain at this point, but there will be. Would that be like a 7/1 date or a June 1st date or something like that?
So July 1st is the intention. There's no date certain at this point because some of that is reliant on the legislative budget process to ensure that we have enough money to extend that temporary Medicaid expansion all the way up until July to launch the BHP. But the current plan is for July 1, 2024.
Okay, so then the change, if I'm following this, is that the impact on the marketplace has been moved up. In other words, we were expecting waiting till 1/1/25 open enrollment, and now it'll be earlier. Is that the change?
Yeah, the change is basically when we launch the program in the middle of 2024, we can't restrict enrollment to only people moving from OHP. We have to open it up to folks who apply for coverage from other sources, be it if they're uninsured or if they're in the marketplace now. Yes.
Okay, so most of that enrollment's on January 1st, of course, but for those that do seek effective dates from July 1st through the rest of the year, their only option would then be the BHP if they're in that income bracket.
Right. If somebody is not covered by anything and after the rollout in, say, July or August, they apply for coverage instead of getting sent to the marketplace. If they're in this income range, they would enroll in the BHP. For folks who are already enrolled in marketplace coverage, they would not move automatically. They would have to take action of some sort to move, either by doing that through their marketplace application or doing that through the one system to apply to at the state level for the BHP.
Mary Beth has a follow-up.
Yeah, just for those folks who are already on the marketplace, when they go have and update their information through the federally facilitated marketplace, if they're above that 200% of the federal poverty level, they'll still be eligible for tax credits and nothing will change for that. Okay.
Nothing, correct.
Thanks for letting me interrupt you, Tim. Thanks.
Yeah, I see another hand up also.
Yeah, hi Tim. This is Drew Tarab from. You mentioned that the expectation is that it would take about 3 years for those who are in the marketplace, the federal, the exchange marketplace, to make their way over to the BHP for if they're qualifying income. Is the state's expectation that that would be about a third, and a third, or do you think there's like a bolus in 2025 with smaller numbers in 26 and 7?
So that will be that's a great question, and you're setting this up well for the second half of this presentation, where we'll go through like in more detail what those numbers looks like.
Glad I could help.
Yeah. I see one more hand up.
Yep, thanks. This is Paul Harmon. And back on that consumer mitigation around tax credits, I mean, that seems pretty vitally important for those consumers. And so just curious if there's a timeline for those discussions with CMS and Treasury.
So we've had them. We've gotten assurances from CMS and Treasury at this point, just verbal, but we're planning to get this in writing that confirms the approach. And this is, frankly, this is consistent with how they've treated consumers in states that implemented the ACA's Medicaid expansion in the middle of the year, is folks who quote unquote should be moved to the BHP or to Medicaid, right? Who stay on the marketplace, who don't take any action and who stay on the marketplace and keep getting those tax credits will not face the repayment of those tax credits because they were supposed to move to the BHP. We have gotten that confirmation, and we are efforting to get that in writing so that it is more clear. But we feel comfortable with that conclusion. I think the big thing that we're still working towards is figuring out what's the federal strategy to help if somebody does update their application and move in September to the BHP. Can the federal marketplace help with disenrollment from a plan so that consumer isn't still getting tax credits for coverage that they're not using for 2 or 3 more months and thus would have to repay that. That's the outstanding piece is better determining what CMS is going to do to help that scenario, to help protect consumers in that way. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I was just,
Okay.
worried about that year 2, year 3 for those people who stick around and the surprise, avoiding that at all costs.
And I will just say that this phase, don't want to say phasing strategy. The strategy of the state to say that folks who don't update their application and automatically re-enroll in their same marketplace plan can do that, is in the blueprint that we submitted to, or that is out for public comment, and CMS has seen a draft. So we're trying to make sure that this detail is in the blueprint so that when we get federal approval of the blueprint, we have federal approval of this strategy.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So next I want to provide an update. I know that in a few different audiences we've talked about the goal of the task force and the goal of the state had been to secure some federal dollars to mitigate any financial impact on marketplace consumers with income over 200% that could occur after we pull the BHP cohort out of the marketplace. As you may recall, at least some of you may recall, but some background, the task force considered 2 real notable ideas to secure these federal dollars. Both would have required a 1332 waiver and frankly ultimately proved too complicated for the federal marketplace to administer. So first, we discussed the idea of a premium assistance program using federal savings that would result from the reduced silver loading after the under 200% cohort leaves the marketplace. We needed to administer this. We would have needed to administer this through the carriers because of limitations to the federal platform. And in the end, CMS determined that the simplistic structure that would have resulted in something like everybody gets a $25 reduction to their premium, would have run afoul of the affordability guardrail associated with 1332 waivers because of too many winners and losers. Next, the task force discussed the idea of a gold benchmark in which the lowest cost gold plan would replace the second lowest cost silver plan as the benchmark for determining federal tax credits. While the initial actuarial analysis indicated this to be potentially feasible, albeit with a modest state cost, CMS again ultimately determined that they were not able to make this happen on the federal marketplace on the timeline that Oregon would have needed. So after rejecting these two proposals, CMS did come back with one final proposal for Oregon to consider, but really like the other two ideas, it ended up not being feasible on the timeline needed. Under this idea, Oregon would use a 1332 waiver to establish a BHP lookalike, which theoretically could have enabled Oregon to capture federal pass-through to fund the program and to fund the mitigation efforts that we talked about. However, unlike with the BHP, pass-through funding via 1332 waivers does not increase with enrollment. This would have put Oregon at significant financial risk if more people were covered by the new program than under the baseline marketplace assumptions. Simply put, we believe Oregon would likely need additional general fund support to cover the cost of the program itself. And would certainly not have had enough federal resources to fund the additional premium assistance for people over 200% of poverty covered on the marketplace. Basically, this approach would not have given us enough money to both fully fund the BHP lookalike and to fund the mitigation efforts. It would have necessitated state, probably significant state funds. So while the 1332 waiver strategies we pursued with CMS aren't viable, the fact that consumers may automatically re-enroll in their current plans, and I think this is on the next slide, offers a pathway to phase in the enrollment
Tim,
mitigation over 3 years. Yeah.
Tim, Paul had a question, so.
Oh, sorry. Go for it.
No worries. Maybe not a question, more of a comment that, like, it is disappointing to me that the state sees this risk, and I agree it's a real risk, but in the absence of the state holding it, it's going to be the consumers in the individual market who hold it. And, you know, with those premium increases. And so it's just, you know, it's the result of a good program and a good idea, but it still then feels weird that some of that risk or most of that risk is going to be borne by the consumers in the market. You know, this wasn't like, this is a state created event, again, for a good reason, but then, you know, kind of exposing individual consumers to the risk the state feels is too big to bear.
In terms of having state funding for the mitigation strategies?
Correct. If the state is worried about that level of funding, you know, to support the, you know, affordable coverage, but in the absence of that, that just means the consumers themselves are bearing that considerable weight that the state is worried about.
And this really is a function of the legislation and the task force, that there was not many of the goals in the legislation would say that so, you know, within funding constraints or something to those effect. And the task force was pretty clear that they were not willing to recommend state funding for this mitigation effort, that there was not a pot of state money to do this. And I think that one of the challenges that came up really with both of the ideas that we had is the inability to operationalize them either on the federal marketplace or through the carriers to deliver a sort of a flat subsidy. So I mean, I hear your concerns and I totally get that. I think the last section of this presentation also sort of will lay out some of the trade-off and comparisons to the sort of the goal of House Bill 4035 is to protect coverage gains, and the conclusion really was that moving forward with the BHP, even without a federally funded mitigation strategy, would better protect coverage gains than not moving forward.
Yeah, and I do agree with that. And I guess we can talk more at the end too. It still just feels like, hey, we are choosing one subset of Oregonians over another. And it's a net improvement overall, but just how that feels to me is, especially, representing the marketplace here, it's tough to hear.
I totally hear that. I think that I would imagine that the task force would share the disappointment that none of these ideas were ultimately able to meet federal approval.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so before diving into, and I think that this really starts to get to some of Drew's question about the assumptions for folks in this sort of like three-year approach. As I mentioned, marketplace consumers who don't update information from one year to the next can automatically remain in their current plan or prior year plan. And the federal marketplace cannot override this function to send people to the BHP if they don't update their application. And so from 2022 to 23, about 30% of consumers in CSR plans, which we used as sort of a proxy for this group, automatically re-enrolled in their same plan the next year. So taking this into consideration means that many people would not move to the BHP in the first year, which will enable Oregon to more slowly reduce silver loading in 2025 and 2026. Again, giving consumers a chance to adjust.
So
and now sorry.
My apologies.
No, go for it. Go for it.
So the expectation is about 70% would likely, in the first year of 2025, would likely end up in the BHP.
Yes, that's about right. I think that when we actually look at the numbers, we chose a slightly more conservative estimate. So I think it's somewhere in the 70 to 75%. But yeah, we modeled two different scenarios, one of sort of a higher level of automatic re-enrollment and one with a lower automatic re-enrollment, kind of both of like surrounding this 30%. And we are the slides that we'll go through next show the lower level, the more conservative estimate, in part because of the 2024 wrinkle we got from CMS.
Sure. And I guess some of that has to do with how widely promoted the BHP would be in media and other things.
Yeah, that's right too.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. So this next section walks through this in a bit more detail and relies really on some extensive actuarial analysis performed by Oliver Wyman. And before diving in, I do want to pause a second to note a few key assumptions that informed this analysis, and to note that this analysis was fully completed prior to Oregon receiving direction from CMS that they could not approve the implementation phasing plan we went over at the beginning. So we know this has implications for plans and consumers, but we still believe this data is relevant and again informs the choice of the more conservative of the two pieces of analysis that they did. So as noted, the analysis uses 2023 premium rates and trends them forward, and makes further adjustments for CSR loading and makes adjustments for morbidity changes, and then similarly trended claims at the same rate, while again making adjustments for morbidity changes. The analysis assumes the continuation of enhanced ARPA and IRA subsidies into 2027 at the latest. This was a policy decision to really limit the variables happening in this analysis, and really to isolate the impact of the BHP on the market and not get into, you know, the more substantial impact of that changing federal tax credit structure. Finally, want to note that the analysis assumes no significant changes to employers' decisions related to offering health coverage or the contributions they require of employees. And there are a handful of other additional assumptions that we can also provide if that would be useful. But this is, I think, the big stuff.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Drew, do you have another question?
I do. My apologies if I'm been a little too questiony, but Tim, you mentioned that there was assumptions about morbidity. If there's an ability to make that a little more transparent, I think many of us would be appreciative. The reason I'm asking is if the premiums are likely to go up, for, as you've noted, for a segment of our marketplace amongst the more affluent individual purchasers of the marketplace, I think it'd be good to know how that might impact overall market morbidity, as some of those individuals may sit on the sideline if the premiums rise too high. So
yeah,
anyway.
so yeah, and some of that I think will show up here at a high level. The removal of the under 200% cohort improves the morbidity of the marketplace, and I think that what you're getting at is, you know, changes after that could affect who's enrolled, and I think that that's what they're referring to, what Oliver Wyman is referring to in that assumption, is that they continue to make morbidity adjustments based on that process. And we do have some more detailed slides that we can dig up the answer to what those slight adjustments are, not just in year 1, but year 2 and 3. They are very small, but certainly we can provide more information on that.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
And Tim, I think we have another question from Gladys.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, Tim. Would you clarify what you mean by no significant impact to employees' decision or employers' decision to offer coverage to employees or to the require employee contribution? What do you mean by that?
That built into this analysis is an assumption that the employer market basically stays the same as it is now, that there's no major, you know, significant changes into habits that employers have in terms of whether they offer or don't offer coverage. If all employers stopped offering coverage, for instance, more people would be eligible for marketplace tax credits, and this stuff would all change. Or if employers, you know, a ton of them who'd never offered coverage before started to, then fewer people. And so this analysis doesn't consider how, you know, any of that stuff happening.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So before diving into the data, I also want to start by offering a brief summary of the findings. First, the analysis shows how BHP enrollment from the marketplace happening over 3 years allows for a more gradual reduction in the silver load. This slows down the premium impact on the over 200% cohort remaining on the marketplace, and gives the state opportunities to make future adjustments as needed. While this movement is happening, people on the marketplace will be affected in a few different ways. There is an increase in overall net premiums paid by Oregon consumers, though more than half of the aggregate increase is felt by folks making more than 4 times the federal poverty level. Despite this cohort making up barely more than a quarter of the subsidized population. There will be an expected shift in coverage away from gold plans towards bronze and silver plans. And after 3 years, estimate about 1,800 people would be expected to drop marketplace coverage, again, over the 3 years in response to the net premium increases.
Hold on, Tim. Gladys, do you have another question?
Yeah, just reading that and because I saw it before you actually went through it, but I have quite a few clients that are over that 400%. And I mean, they're struggling right now we're looking at a certain population that we want to make sure that are covered. But then now we're forgetting about those that have a little bit, they're making more money, but at the same time, they're still struggling to make their premium payments because they are pretty high and it's going up. I mean, when I know that I'm going to have to pay more, it's kind of makes me not feel good about it. I'm coming from a broker standpoint, and I'm looking at my clients, and we're looking at, and I've already done a shift from gold to silver and silver to gold over the last few years with some of my clients. I can absolutely say, yeah, people are just going to say, I'm going to be out of this. And that's not a good thing. We don't want people to be dropping their coverage. And I think that 1,800 is it's very low. I think it'll be more than that.
Well, I mean, I hear all the concerns. I mean, I think that, you know, this is analysis that is, you know, based on the Oliver Wyman microsimulation analysis, you know, takes a lot of this stuff into account, and you know, to forecast folks' decision making. I think a couple of the points that are overarching that I would raise are that, you know, folks who are enrolled in silver plans won't really see a premium change at all, because the loss of silver loading coincides with the reduction of the value of the premium tax credit. So their net premium for the second lowest cost silver plan will not change because of any of this. And I think that and the fact that I think what is leading to the smaller estimate of the number of folks who would drop coverage is really that the ARPA and IRA subsidies are really quite significant. So even with the change in silver loading and the lost purchasing power towards gold plans that happens, folks are still facing premiums that are lower than before the subsidies would have happened. So the changes to the overall affordability structure with ARPA and the IRA tax credits still put people in a better situation than they were before that with the full silver load. And I think some of the other some of the slides towards the end will really help put this in context with the impact on folks under 200% of the poverty level, and really how many people would be expected to end up uninsured if the state, if we didn't create this basic health program and folks were leaving Medicaid and going into the marketplace. And really the reminder, I guess, of that early slide that showed prior to the public health emergency, almost 20% of folks in Oregon with income between 138 and 200% of poverty went uninsured. Again, it was by far the highest uninsured rate of any income cohort in the state. And so the goal of House Bill 4035 and the direction to the state, really, or to OHA and to the task forces to maintain those coverage gains and really to focus on the 138 to 200% population that has historically had the most difficult time getting access to health coverage. And I think some of the other questions will certainly get answered in these later slides, and we'll get to see a little bit more of the breakdown of how and when folks will see premium increases.
Thank you.
So diving into the data a bit, first, we have a chart showing the size of the individual market over time as folks move into the BHP. And certainly, kind of going back to some of Drew's questions, the largest jump will be expected in 2025, with smaller numbers of people moving in 2026 and 27. And it's worth pointing out that even with this movement, the expectation is that the individual market stays nearly flat from 26 to 27 as new entrants offset some of the folks moving to the BHP. Because movement out of the marketplace doesn't happen all at once, next slide. Because the movement of the marketplace doesn't happen all at once, the silver load also steps down. And again, the analysis shows that the largest change is expected in 2025, but there's still a 7 to 8% silver load in that year. And then in 2026, it's 4.5 to 5.5% before settling in 2027 at a lower rate, reflective of enrollment in the 73% CSR plan for people in the 200 to 250% of poverty range. So the lowering of the silver load and subsequent impact on premiums also does cause some movement within metal tiers. And this next slide shows how that movement shakes out in the end. The changes from the baseline to step 1 represent changes associated with folks moving into the BHP in 2025, and from step 1 to 2 reflects the behavior change by marketplace enrollees above 200%, essentially their responses to the premium changes. And so next we really get into the specifics of what the impact is. And so looking at all incomes throughout all the 3 years, you can see that still in the first year, almost 2/3 of folks would see a premium increase of no more than $25. And even by year 3, it's still almost 60% would see a premium increase of no more than $25, with 20 to 30% of folks seeing no change at all, or even a premium reduction. And I think the story really, though, is by income cohort, and we can see that for the lower income range of the folks who would remain on the marketplace, the vast majority have relatively modest impacts, and over 30% of people would experience no change at all. And only relatively small numbers of folks would see premium increases at higher numbers. Again, just to note, the premium impacts that somebody experiences are in part dependent on their plan choices as well. And so to reiterate, for folks who are in silver plans, the impact is essentially zero or very close to zero, whereas people who pick gold and bronze plans may see the increase more so. And the next slide shows for the next income cohort, 300 to 400% of poverty. Again, in year 1, more than half of folks would see an increase of no more than $25. And certainly over time, as the silver load phases out, that increase grows. And then the last slide is folks over 400%. Obviously, not as many people in this income category are getting subsidies because of the way the ACA structure is. But again, still 30 to 40% of folks would experience a premium increase of not more than $25. And so the last slide again summarizes all of this for 2027 when it's fully phased in. And it's something like almost 2/3 again would experience a premium increase of not more than $25. Though certainly there are some folks who experience larger premium increases, again concentrated at the higher income levels, and for folks who are choosing gold plans. So I alluded to this a little bit, but I think it's worth stepping back. And again, the goal of House Bill 4035 was to protect coverage gains that were experienced in Oregon in the wake of the continuous coverage provisions in Medicaid. And I think the data that we looked at really showed the 138 to 200% of poverty income cohort was the least likely to have health insurance before, and their ability to maintain coverage on the Oregon Health Plan was really the driving factor in this population having more access to health coverage now than they did in 2019. we think that without a BHP, approximately 20,000, maybe more of the 55,000 people in this income range we think are on OHP. More than 20,000 of those folks would likely lose coverage if they were terminated from the Oregon Health Plan and sent to the marketplace. Again, this is based on sort of the historic coverage rates in the marketplace of that income range, and based on national estimates of how people will respond. And this 20,000 compares to favorably to the 1,800 people that this analysis expects would drop marketplace coverage over the course of these 3 years. Again, it's not that there's no impact to the market, and I totally understand the concerns that y'all have raised. And so we want to make sure to be here to highlight exactly what our analysis suggests will happen, and how that's informing the state's approach moving forward. Again, sort of the key takeaways, enrollment from the marketplace will take place over 3 years, which will slow down the premium impact, and give the state opportunities to find solutions moving forward, especially if and when the state has its own marketplace platform, which we certainly learned with our conversations with CMS. Their inability to implement these ideas on the federal marketplace certainly affected our ability to achieve them. There is a modest impact on most marketplace enrollees, but obviously that is not a zero impact, and coverage will shift somewhat slightly, but away from gold to silver or bronze coverage. And then again, really, I think that this is the key point with the direction of House Bill 4035 to maximize coverage gains. The implementing the basic health program best protects the coverage gains that Oregon experienced in the wake of the public health emergency. And then, so just a bit of some of the next steps and what's happening. And I do see your hand, Andrew, and this is the last slide. So over the next couple months, we're going to incorporate public comments into Oregon's BHP blueprint and prepare it for Health Policy Board review and submission to CMS in July. We're going to continue to work with DCBS to develop some 2024 enrollment assumptions that would then inform any guidance that they decide to give to carriers related to rates. And then we're going to continue to develop communications and outreach plan for this mid-2024 launch to minimize consumer confusion and really make sure folks know their options when this program launches. And I see a couple hands up. They get numbered for me, so I see that Drew had his hand up first. So it's your turn.
Thanks, Tim. Really informative, and I don't envy your position having to deliver this news. A lot of the analysis is based on assumption, obviously, because we're projecting into the future. It's all assumption in many respects. Did Oliver Wyman or the state do sensitivity testing around those assumptions? And if so, is that something that could also be shared with this committee or made public through other forums? For example, like the 1,800 individuals leaving the individual marketplace, that's a lot of assumption, perhaps. It's not hard to envision that being more. The premium increases or the shift moving away from gold into silver and bronze has other impacts on consumer behavior as well. And so anyway, my long story short, if there was sensitivity analysis, it'd be wonderful if you could share that with us.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't, and to be fair, we have a robust amount of data from Oliver Wyman. They certainly did sensitivity testing in the process of their analysis to make sure that they're looking at it right. We don't have it in a sense of like different scenarios run of like, hey, if the silver load steps down further, if more people move in year one than we think, how does that ripple out? I think what I would say is that it just kind of moves up the 2027 estimates further, and maybe this is an area where we could get sort of a written response from Oliver Wyman about their micro simulation model, but they have a model that is calibrated to the state that, that reflects, that looks at consumer behavior and decision making at various price points. So if folks were paying $300 a month for premiums prior to the IRA subsidies, or $300 a month more than they're paying now prior to those subsidies, and this would increase their premiums by $150, it's still less than they were paying before, and they were making the decision to purchase before. So their model wouldn't assume that they're unwilling to make that decision now. I mean, I think the example that we stuck with that was given, if you used to pay $5 for a cappuccino at Starbucks and the price goes down to $3, but then goes back up to $4, when it goes back up to $4, you're probably going to keep paying it, even though it's higher than the $3, because it's still lower than you were paying before. And so I think that that's sort of the general concept that informs this, the conclusion that there's less migration out of the marketplace than I think folks were worried about back in the fall, because even though there's a net increase in premiums, it's still less than people had been paying prior to the ARPA subsidies. And I know that's not the exact answer to your question about the sensitivity analysis. I think what I would say is if the movement out of the marketplace happens faster than this analysis suggests, then the 2027 full impact just moves up to 2026, for instance. In terms of their overall, structure of their micro simulation model and how it manages those assumptions, perhaps we could follow back up with the actuaries to get more for you there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul has a question.
Paul? Yeah.
Sure. And so want to echo Drew. Thank you. Appreciate the transparency. It's good for us to know. I really wanted to note that, even $25 a month is a pretty big deal for people at 200% FPL. And I would say $200 a month is a really big deal, even if you're at 400% FPL. Just like, I know the dollars don't necessarily seem big necessarily, although I would argue 200 feels big. It's really going to have an impact on these consumers. And for those of us who work with those consumers in the market, the hard part of this is, it's not because the cost of care has gone up. It's not because there's new advancements. It's simply this, unintended consequence of policy. And that's just, it's a hard message to share with consumers who depend on this coverage.
I totally appreciate that. And I would never want any of what I've said to, and I don't think you're saying this, to make a comment that $200 a month is not a big deal for consumers. I think that that's certainly, true. And I think that the presentation of those tables is really just designed to show that for most folks, the impact is modest, and really not to hide that there is a projected impact for some consumers that is sort of fairly viewed as something more than modest. I think one thing that I've struggled with sometimes in how we present this too is also to remind that the even if all 55,000 folks moved from OHP to the marketplace, and thinking about the 36,000 in the marketplace now, is the premium reductions that those folks are going to receive by moving into the BHP, and in some case could be $25 a month for somebody at well under 200% of poverty, just to compare the affordability provisions for that group. And I totally understand. I think one of the things that's frustrating with this is that there's always trade-offs for how this how these programs and how health policy gets developed, and there's not an easy solution that lowers everybody's premiums in a simple way. It's, and so I think that that's where we're struggling. I do appreciate both of your comments about we are trying to be transparent and not hide the impact that this is going to have, even though, and that also means being transparent about what we think the impact is of not doing this is the coverage loss of folks moving from OHP to the marketplace. And I saw Laurel put her hand up. Laurel is our
Tim,
project lead for our basic health program team. So I don't know if she had something to add. Are there other hands up too?
Yeah, we have Mary Beth in the room has a question too, but Laurel wants to add something now. That's good.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to, Tim underscored there that it's been challenging to try to find solutions to this problem. And I know, Paul, you mentioned sort of, the state's willingness to be considering, state-funded solutions to this real issue that we're navigating here. And I did just want to kind of remind everyone of some of the conversations that we had back in the fall. We had, I think it was 4 carrier tables, 3 in the fall. The 4th one was most recently, where we did try to talk through solutions, talk about a state administered subsidy. And time again, we came up against system level challenges. We heard from the carriers that a state administered subsidy would be really challenging and perhaps impossible. And so I just want to remind folks that some of what we're dealing with here, we're hoping may be alleviated with the development of a state-based marketplace, because that's really part of the issue that we're navigating here. When the feds, when we were talking about, getting federal dollars for the subsidy, it still would have been a federally funded state administered subsidy, which again, at this juncture without a state-based marketplace seemed really impossible. So I wanted to just remind folks of that history of how we've been trying to be thinking through solutions here and some possibilities in the future with an SBF.
Great, thank you. Mary Beth?
Laurel, you actually just started to touch on my question, but if we get a state-based marketplace, those mitigation strategies may still be available, but will it be, I guess my question is, will it be too late if that happens in 2026, 2027, after the BHP has been implemented and people have enrolled and these marketplace effects have already taken place?
Tim's been in the, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was gonna say, I think to the point of Paul's comments about state funded stuff, it will never be too late for state funding to mitigate some of this, and even some of the pathways to secure federal dollars could have still had state impacts, on the reinsurance program, and so there still could have been some kind of modest state cost to those proposals anyway. So while capturing some of the federal funds may be more challenging over time, I think that there still would be the potential for other solutions moving forward. Sorry, Laurel, you were also going to say something.
No, I was going to underscore that part of Oliver Wyman's analysis suggests that it wouldn't be too late if we were thinking about potential solutions in 26. So I think point well taken, Mary Beth, and also I think what we're seeing in this analysis is that this introduction of the role that auto re-enrollment will play on this gradual transition creates a sort of a longer pathway, a longer runway for opportunities for mitigation.
That's great. Yeah, this might be a good place to, did you have a follow-up? Okay, that's a great question, because this might be a good place to end. Unfortunately, we probably need to move on with our agenda, but I know we have a meeting in July, which maybe we'll pick up some of this, but I think we don't want to give up on the ability to do some mitigation. And I don't think it's just mitigation per se, but also making sure we don't lose our ability to tap into federal funds that might be going away. So it sounds like there's maybe opportunity to keep that going, but we don't envy, like we said, to come into this room and have to deliver the news. I think as Oregonians, we can take a step back and say this is good, but we are responsible for coverage for consumers through the marketplace. So we want to make sure we're not leaving any stone unturned and see if there's something we can do to help improve the outcome here. But
Yeah,
thank you
great.
both.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right, so with that, we are going to move on to public comment, see if we have anything this week. No public comment, so we are going to move on to our break. I see it's 10:30. How does that put us? We'll take a 10-minute break, so we'll be back at 10:40. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. Our next part of our agenda, we're going to receive a legislative session update for Oregon, and we've been joined by Phil Schmidt, who's the government relations representative from the Oregon Health Authority. So,
yeah, thank you. And I hope folks listening remotely can hear me all right. Philip Schmidt, I use he, him pronouns, and as Craig said, I'm on the government relations team at the Oregon Health Authority. And yeah, I think that I was saying to Craig during the break, you know, when Chicky and the marketplace team were talking about what this update might consist of, you know, there's a huge number of bills that are of interest. So yeah, Chicky and the team said, do you have slides? And I said, you know, I don't, because it would be a slide with a lot of bill numbers, all of which are in the same status, which is sort of in this limbo. So if you haven't been tracking the news in the Oregon State Capitol, as obsessively as some of us in the room, you know, the Senate Republicans walked out on May 3rd and haven't been back, denying the Senate a quorum to be able to do its business, which is consider bills in particular. The committees have continued to function in the Senate, and the House has continued to pass bills and do regular business. But the Senate has been out of operation for 22 days now, with really not great signs of an agreement being reached to come back. You know, the Senate Republicans have a couple specific policy bills that they're really upset about, and they also had a complaint about the grade level of the descriptions of the legislation. However, you know, we've had quite a few of these walkouts over the past, I think 5 now. And voters did pass a constitutional amendment barring folks who walk out and get 10 or more unexcused absences for standing for election for another term. And so there was part of this walkout that was also seemed to be about testing that provision in the courts. So many of the Republican senators that walked out have now hit the threshold of 10 unexcused absences, and, you know, under, you know, a variety of sort of legal theories, I think, are looking to bring the issue to the courts. This, you know, sort of resolve it. In the meantime, OHA, you know, we've continued to do work on a budget, which, you know, would fund our activities, and either could happen, you know, a budget consideration could either happen, you know, at the very end of the session. You know, they could maybe, the Senate Republicans have said they would be willing to come back on the last day to consider the budget, and bipartisan bills defined loosely. We're not sure exactly what that list would consist of, bipartisan policy bills. Or in a special session, they could negotiate, you know, the terms of a special session to come after this one ends in one way or another, and consider the budget and perhaps policy bills. Special sessions, the governor calls them, and the legislature can call itself into a special session as well, but the terms of what you consider in a special session are very carefully choreographed and negotiated. So, you know, it would be likely come back to, you know, consider a budget, you know, budget package, and maybe these 3 bills. You know, we also are staying in communication with legislative leadership in the governor's office to answer any questions about the policy and budget impacts of the stalled legislation, one of which I'll talk about in a little more detail. And, you know, but we are also continuing to support the governor's agenda, including her priority bills, so that if the logjam unjams, you know, we're trying to stay ready for more action. So I think the number one bill for this committee that we really have been working on is Senate Bill 972, which would sort of start the process towards a state-based marketplace. While it didn't move out of committee on a bipartisan basis, it has not seen a ton of partisan opposition. And so, we think that the chances, if the logjam were to whatever happens to log jams unjam, that it would have pretty good chances of moving forward. It seems fairly uncontroversial. Chicky and the team have done a great job of sort of educating folks in the Capitol and around the Capitol about, what moving to a state-based marketplace means, and more importantly, setting forth a very thoughtful process that allows a lot of consideration, allows the legislature to have another look at whether they want to move forward with it. So the process is structured in a way that I think makes people feel pretty comfortable that it would be thoughtful and not sort of race towards moving to a state-based marketplace without weighing costs and other considerations. So I think that one actually has a fairly high chance, again, if the logjam unbreaks, which that actually doesn't seem as high. So if there were to be policy packages that moved in a special session, I could imagine state-based marketplace being one of the pieces where they say, hey, this is fairly uncontroversial, a high priority of the governor. Let's put it into, a health policy package. There's lots of controversial legislation that wouldn't make the cut. So, what other scenarios are we preparing for? I mean, yeah, as I said, we're either we're sort of preparing for all scenarios and looking at what would happen and talking with legislators in the governor's office and others about, if the session ends and we don't have a budget, what a continuing resolution would do for agency operations. So that's one outcome, is no budget, but just continue at your current service levels until we come back and do a new budget. I think that the issue there that we've been flagging for folks actually that is of interest to the marketplace is that absent a budget, redeterminations and that process gets a little bumpy for people, right? Because we need funding for the temporary Medicaid expansion that bridges people to the basic health program that you were just hearing about. There probably is funding for the basic health plan that we would need. So I think it just makes things a little bumpier if we don't have a budget that sort of takes care of some of these immediate needs in the short term. So we're letting folks know that that's the situation. I do think it'd be really difficult if we didn't have funding for temporary Medicaid expansion and people started dropping off fully. We'd sort of lose that window that we have right now to keep people, to sort of keep them in this bridge across to a basic health plan in the future. And I think, the marketplace can tell you it's hard. Once people have lost coverage, it's pretty hard to get them back. So I think that's a real risk that we're highlighting for folks. We're also highlighting, there's a bill that would extend CCO's contracts by 2 years so that we wouldn't start the procurement process right now. Reason for that is really all these other things the agency is doing, including the basic health plan and redeterminations and the implementation of the 1115 waiver. So there's pretty clear consensus that pushing back procurement process by 2 years would leave room for the agency to accomplish these other big tasks and move into that later. That bill stalled. State-based marketplace. There's a number of behavioral health investments and bills that are stalled that, you know, I'm not a behavioral health expert, but, you know, investments that are really needed that are, you know, and changes that are really needed that are kind of stalled out. So yeah, I think that's sort of the state of play. I'm happy to take questions. I may punt some of them to Rick and Mary Beth, who know just as much as I do or more perhaps. Yeah, I think I was also saying to Craig before we met or during the break that I think I gave you an unsatisfying update in February because it was too early, and now it's another unsatisfying update because we're in a strange vortex where we all wait to find out what'll happen with the rest of the legislative session, if anything. So yeah, happy to answer any questions that I can, but no promises.
Well, while people think about that, maybe I'll ask you just a general process question. Can you, so you said in January, we're a little bit early, but what, if there wasn't a walkout, I guess I'll call it that, when would the session normally end? Where would we be?
Constitutional sine die is June 25th.
June 25th.
So that's when they have to adjourn.
Okay, so in theory, like you said, the logjam could break. But that's less likely, I guess.
What we're reading, yeah, what we're reading in the press, I don't want to speak for one party or another, but what we're reading in the press is that the Senate Democrats and the governor are loath to sort of agree to a negotiated return because then it would potentially reward sort of the walkout behavior.
Yeah.
So the negotiate, and when I say loath to agree, I think they're happy to negotiate. I think when the Senate Republicans are saying, well, we will come back if you don't consider these bills, they're sort of, what I've again been reading in the press is that they say, well, that gives you an effective veto.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, you know, what the constitutional amendment was trying to prevent. So no. But, you know, like the federal negotiations about the debt limit, you know, we've seen this before, and, you know, something will happen. It's a question of when and what.
Disruption.
I do have a question. Have you heard anything about legal action being taken about the walkouts? Like, have the courts weighed in at all?
I haven't seen them file anything. And I think it's just been rumors that that's something that they want to do. Again, from the press, not from me. You, Rick?
I mean, Rick Blackwell, I'm just a member of the public here for Pacific Source Community Solutions, not on the committee. I would agree that I haven't seen any formal legal challenges filed.
Sorry, Rick, I thought you were on.
No, I'm not.
Calling on the audience.
Well, thank you, Phil.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, I will say that, you know, even independent of the sort of unclear prognosis of the legislative session, you know, the basic health plan, temporary Medicaid expansion redeterminations continue to be, you know, really of interest. We're updating the legislature. The marketplace team is doing a fabulous job catching folks coming over, and all the planning that I assume Chicky has updated you all about over the past year and a half is, you know, coming to fruition, and you know, the legislature is very interested in how we're doing, and we're keeping them updated. And I think that all eyes are on us to do redeterminations well and to keep people covered. And I think so far signs are that we're doing fairly well. And you know, we can always do better. I think that that's been the message, is that we're trying to learn from each monthly cycle of redeterminations. But yeah, I think that all the planning that went into this process is paying off as compared to other states in particular.
Okay, I think we're a little ahead of schedule, but I think we can move forward.
next presentation.
Yeah, to our next presentation
Thank you for
on this
having me.
very topic. Thank you, Phil. So next we'll have Vivian talk to us about the unwinding continuous eligibility in Oregon. Give us an update on that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Vivian Levy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the interim deputy Medicaid director for Oregon Health Authority. I was looking back, I go around and give presentations to a lot of different groups, and I was looking back to see when the last time was that I had talked with you all, and it was in January, and that seems like a million years ago. And so I do have a lot of updates and things to share with you that have transpired in the last several months, and happy to answer any questions after that. So we are going to talk about, Oregon Health Plan redeterminations. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. I know that you all have already seen this slide, I believe in previous presentations, but it's worth reiterating that we are going through the process of redetermining 1.4, almost 1.5 million people on the Oregon Health Plan over the next year or so, and that many of those people are going to continue to be eligible for Oregon Health Plan, but just as importantly, many people are not going to continue to be eligible, and so just as much as it is our charge to make sure that those who remain eligible for Oregon Health Plan can continue to receive benefits and coverage, it's also our charge to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to help people who aren't eligible anymore transition to coverage that is available to them, whether that's marketplace coverage, Medicare, employer-sponsored insurance, whatever that might be. Because of course, our overall goal with this whole process is to keep the uninsured rate and the gains that we have made around that, even as we are coming out of the public health emergency. Next slide, please. So you already know that states have 14 months to redetermine eligibility for everybody on Oregon Health Plan. We started this process in April. So far we have initiated 2 renewal cycles, and I can talk a little bit about those. There's also other changes happening at the same time, some of which happened before and are just now starting to actually have impact because of the unwinding. So one of the things that is happening is that in July of this year, as a result of the 1115 demonstration waiver that was approved last year, Oregon will be implementing continuous eligibility for children and adults. And so in a nutshell, what that means is that once a child under the age of 6 becomes eligible for Oregon Health Plan, they will remain eligible without having to take further action until they turn 6, unless they move out of state. And then for anybody 6 and older, we will be implementing 2-year continuous eligibility, which means exactly as it says, that once a person is found eligible and their verifications are provided and their eligibility is approved, they will remain eligible for 2 years before we will review their eligibility again, even if they experience changes in income or other circumstances. And then last but not least, not really last either, there's a lot of things changing. Just trying to mention a few here. About a year and a half ago, there was a state option that was opened up to allow states to provide 12 months of postpartum coverage after the end of a pregnancy. Prior to that, people received 60 days of postpartum coverage. And what research showed is that a lot of health issues that come up and even reasons for mortality that come up among people who have given birth or who have been pregnant, those issues frequently come up beyond that 60-day mark within the first year of when the pregnancy ends. And so this was really a policy push to try to ensure that people remain covered and can get the treatment, sometimes the life-saving treatment that they need during that period of time. We implemented that about a year ago, a little over a year ago now. But because everybody has remained continuously covered, the impact of it hasn't really been felt up to this time. And so now, once we start putting people through redeterminations and going through this unwinding process, that's when this expanded coverage will really start to make more of an impact. Next slide, please. All right, so what do these changes around unwinding mean? So there was a House bill that was passed last year, House Bill 4035, which many of you are very familiar with. And one of the things that did is it created a mandate, essentially, that Oregon Health Authority put some policies in place to ensure that people going through unwinding redeterminations had as much time to respond when we need information, and then to transition into other coverage if they're no longer eligible for Oregon Health Plan. And so the way that we kind of operationalized that is that people have 90 days to respond to their renewal or when they need to provide us with additional verification in order for us to complete their eligibility determination. In addition to that, people who aren't eligible anymore, when they receive a closure notice, they will have at least 60 days before that closure is effective to let them know that it's going to happen and give them an opportunity to let us know that their information has changed and they are actually still eligible, or to explore what other options are available to them and actually become enrolled in those options so that they don't end up with a break in coverage. We are working very closely with the marketplace team to make sure that anytime somebody is found over income for Oregon Health Plan and referred to the federal marketplace, that our state marketplace team gets that information and has the ability to facilitate direct outreach to those households to say, hi, we know that you got a letter saying this. We want to let you know what you can expect that's coming up. And we want to let you know what your options are. And so I know that the marketplace team is going to be talking more about that next, I think. And so you'll get more information about those details. So this is the timeline of our renewals. And this is really meant to show you that there are 10 different cycles, meaning that we are splitting the 1.5 million people up over 10 cycles in order to complete all of the redeterminations in the time that has been allocated to us. Another change that we made as part of this process, something that we've never done before, is that we're going to be sending reminder notices at 30 and 60 days to let people know you still haven't responded. Here's the information that we need. Here's when we need it by in order for you to retain your benefits. In addition to sending those notices, we are sending reports to our CCOs, KeyPro, which is KeyPro and Care Oregon, which are two organizations that support individuals who are on fee-for-service, as well as our Healthier Oregon grantee community partners to help facilitate a second level of outreach, sometimes from entities that our members may be more likely to recognize, may be more likely to respond to. And so we want to make sure that we're not just trying to reach people in one way, but that we're trying to reach them in multiple ways and that they ultimately are reached in the way that works best for them. All right, we can go to the next slide. So there are a couple of publicly available dashboards that are up on our website now, and we can certainly share the link with you if that's not already in your packet. So those two dashboards are focused on two different aspects of the unwinding. This one is the One Customer Service Center dashboard. This is an ODHS dashboard that reflects call wait times, average wait times, as well as the results of the customer service surveys that are randomly conducted at the end of some of the calls. So this is obviously information that we're continuing to observe, track, discuss. What we hear from our operations partners at this point is that they have not seen a large increase in call volume or a large increase in questions about the redeterminations. My suspicion is that that is going to pick up in the month of June. And that it will, because that's when, for most people, that's when their request of verification are due if their renewal was initiated in April. And it's also when closures would happen on June 30th if people don't respond. And then in July, we expect to see even more of an increase in calls because, of course, people will lose their benefits. They will get the notice letting them know that they're going to lose their benefits. And that is likely to generate a lot of calls and questions. So we're holding fairly steady right now. But I expect next time I come back to talk to you, we will have a different story to tell there. We do have a additional call center through PH Tech, who OHA is contracting with, and they have been very instrumental in helping to divert a lot of the calls that don't have to be handled by eligibility staff away from the eligibility staff and into that other call center. So this is the other dashboard, and this is going to get expanded over the next couple of months. Right now, it's fairly basic, and what it shows is how many cases and individuals total need to go through the redetermination process. And then it shows the progress that's been made so far. It also shows, if you look at this bar graph in the middle here, that is the number of individuals that we intend to initiate renewal for in each of the months. And it's a little bit confusing because the months that are shown here are when the renewals actually due. So when I've been talking to you about the renewals we initiated in April, those are the folks you'll see on the June bar, for example, because their renewals are due in June. And that continues to hold true all the way through. So, for example, the March renewals will be initiated in January of 2024. You see that there is a dip here for about 3 months where where our numbers are quite a bit lower. The reason for that is we're working very closely with our ODHS partners to ensure that when there are, because of course they also have to process eligibility for SNAP, TANF, employment-related daycare. And so we want to make sure that we are not overloading them in a single month and creating a backlog where there doesn't need to be one. And so those 3 months are months when activity for the SNAP program, which is our second largest program after Oregon Health Plan, when that program becomes very active and there's a lot of responses and processing that needs to happen during that time. So that's why we have a little bit of a dip for those months and then it goes back up. The one thing I do want to point out, we are updating this dashboard to make this more clear, and that should happen in the next couple of weeks, but this complete number can be a little bit misleading. This complete number includes individuals who are approved, but have been asked to provide some sort of verification. So for example, if I am approved, but the system requires verification of my income, I'm going to get an approval notice with a request for information for income, and I have 90 days to send that in. And so that right now will be reflected in this complete number. But of course, there is a chance that I'm not going to respond to that request for information and ultimately not remain eligible. So we're breaking this number out so that it's easier to see who is approved, and who is still really in process. What I can tell you, because we just did this analysis on the April and the May renewal cycles, is that we're seeing that somewhere between 60 and 70% of individuals have been approved without needing to provide any additional verification information. So that is actually quite good. It's a little bit higher than what we were expecting, and it means that we are able to electronically verify people's information and in slightly higher numbers than we had expected. Next slide, please.
Oh, Vivian?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Craig. Do you mind going back a slide?
Of course not.
And do you mind if I interrupt you in your?
No, not at all. Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think this dashboard's very helpful and has a lot of good information, and I appreciate where you're expanding that information. But just a question about the complete number. Would that also include people who have been determined not to no longer be eligible?
Yes, it does also include that number. And so far, there are a little under 20,000 individuals who have been found not eligible.
So when you update this or improve it, will you have that
Yes.
as well? Okay. Thanks,
Yes,
Vivian.
we will. Absolutely. I'm sorry for not mentioning that. I want to mention a few other things actually that are going to get added in the next few phases of this dashboard. There's going to be a breakout of this information based on our RealD SOGI demographic data. So we'll be able to see for people who are losing benefits, for people who remain approved but have to provide verification, and for people who were approved, what that breakout is across race, ethnicity, language, gender, all of those different criteria. So that is coming. We are also going to be adding a geographical breakout. So you'll be able to see across the state if there are, differences in where people are getting approved, where people are being asked for verification, those types of things. And we're really hoping to use that information and data in a proactive way to identify, to draw some conclusions from it, and to work to mitigate any negative impact that we're seeing disproportionately across any of these groups. And for example, if there's geographic differences, dig into why that might be and how we might be able to address that. So it's an opportunity to kind of look at our processes under a bit more of a microscope than we usually do, and use our data to inform and improve what we're doing. So just wanted to share a couple quick resources with you all, and then happy to take any other questions there are. So there's a lot of partner resources. There's something called the Keep Covered Partner Newsletter that you can sign up for on our website that, exactly as it sounds, provides updates that are geared toward community partners, but can be useful to anybody who works with community members and wants to know what's going on. There is also an Unwinding Partner webpage that includes updates, a toolkit, and then there are webinars that are held either monthly or every other month, I'm not sure which, to provide updates about all of this information. And those webinars are held both in English and in Spanish. Next slide, please. These change tools are one of my favorite things. They're also, if anybody's ever done anything called journey mapping, it's the same, sort of the same kind of concept where we walked through the experience that people in different situations will have and will go through, and developed a tool to kind of explain what that process and what that journey looks like. And we are planning to continue to add to these and create more change tools over time, but the ones that are there, I think, are very valuable in understanding the experience that the people that we work with and interact with are going through. Next slide, please. This is a One Notices guide, which is also up and available on our page. And just as it sounds, it's really kind of it gives you a template of the notices that we send out. We did a huge revamp of the medical eligibility notices over the past couple of years. They look and feel different, and they're set up differently. And so this is really meant to kind of break down how those notices are set up, so that if somebody walks into your office, calls you, you interact with somebody who needs help understanding how to read the notice, what the things in the notice mean. This is sort of an extra tool to be able to help with that assistance. And then next, please. All right, and last thing I wanted to share, we have a feedback team, which was developed really based on and out of the COVID-19 feedback team that we had during the public health emergency. This website that you see here at the bottom goes to a real team of real humans who read every email that comes in. And this is a great place to give us feedback about what you feel is working well and what you feel is not working well in the unwinding. If there are specific situations that you are seeing that you feel like need to be addressed, this is a great place to send that information. If you have a question about something you're seeing that doesn't make sense or that you don't understand about how the unwinding is going, this is a great place to reach out to. We have several meetings every week with this team where we work through the questions and issues that come to them so that they can actually get back to people and get them the information that they need. So with that, I think I have talked enough and very happy to answer any questions you all might have.
Thank you, Vivian. Any questions from committee members? Yes, we have a question. Nina.
Vivian, when you were talking about the postpartum 12-month coverage, at the end of their 12 months, they would be redetermined, and if eligible for OHP, then would have that 2 years of continuous eligibility?
That is a great question, Nina. Thank you. So the continuous eligibility, there's two different concepts. There's a concept called continuous eligibility and a concept called protected eligibility. Protected eligibility only applies to pregnant people and people in their postpartum period. And it can actually run concurrently to the continuous eligibility. So let's say that somebody becomes pregnant and they are found eligible for OHP, and they for 5 months of their pregnancy, and then they have their postpartum coverage for a year. If they still have 6 months, I don't think my math is right, but go with me here. If they still have 6 months of continuous eligibility left, then they will go through a redetermination and they will be moved into whatever is the most appropriate program for them to stay in for their continuous eligibility period. If they're, let's say if they're, 210% of the federal poverty level, if we redetermine them at the end of their postpartum period and they are just still eligible, let's say they're at 130% of the federal poverty level, then we will simply redetermine them, assign them a new continuous eligibility period, and move them into the appropriate program. So basically, the continuous eligibility is there one way or the other to ensure that that total coverage period is 2 years.
Thank you.
Of course.
Looks like somebody online has a question. I can't tell who that is, but go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. And I just want to ask the same questions on that Nina just asked on the postpartum for CAWEM. You said it's covered only 60 days. So if the mother have some issues conditioning from labor and past 60 days, do they have to pay that out of pocket by themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And I should have addressed that more thoroughly. So for both OHP Plus for pregnant people and Healthier Oregon for pregnant people, we have implemented the 12 months of postpartum coverage. For people who are still on CAWEM Plus and not on Healthier Oregon, what you just stated is true. Their coverage is continued. Technically, under federal law, CAWEM Plus doesn't have any postpartum period. We have created a 60-day postpartum period using Reproductive Health Equity Act funds. So that is paid for by general funds right now. And the hope and the intention is that we are going to transfer the remainder of the people who are currently receiving CAWEM into Healthier Oregon on July 1st, at which point this 12-month postpartum period will apply to them. So it's really dependent upon, you know, making the assumption that we're going to fully expand on July 1st. We're hoping that that 60-day postpartum period will not be an issue anymore.
Thank you. Can I also ask another questions in the complete of the OHP? I want to know that if what kind of response that you get from the group that over 65 years old, how can they process, because they aging and they're not computer proficient, how they do complete the renewal on that target group? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking about that. So we, OHA and our partners at APD, Adults and Persons with Disabilities, have been partnering very closely for the last year and a half on this unwinding process for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. Individuals who are covered through APD programs often face additional barriers in navigating the process and being able to interact with the process. And so the APD team has created some additional direct outreach methods that they are using. So they are actually reaching out to all of their folks who are coming up for a renewal, so that they're not just receiving a notice, but they're also receiving some sort of direct outreach. In addition to that, anybody who is receiving long-term services and supports who has a case manager, their case manager is reaching out to work directly with them to ensure that the renewal is completed. There's also some outreach and communication that has gone directly out to facilities to help them where people are living and receiving care, to help them understand what is happening so that they can help better support the people who are living in their care. So I will not pretend that I think that that is going to solve the whole problem or fill the whole gap. I still think that it is a risk. And one of the many things that we need to be tracking and assessing are, you know, how effective we're being in reaching those folks and ensuring that they stay covered. So it's definitely very top of mind for us, but we are doing as many things as we can think of to sort of add that additional layer of direct outreach.
Thank you.
Of course.
Good. Any other questions for Vivian? Well, I just wanted to thank you. I know in January, Chicky said she was looking forward to our April meeting because we'd be into the redetermination process, and here we are in May, and it seems like it's going very well, at least from my perspective. And I think that's a credit to the Oregon Health Authority and the marketplace and the CCOs to try to make this as seamless for members as possible. So thank you for that update, and hopefully we'll continue to have a smooth transition here.
Thank you all for having me. Take care.
Okay. Next, we have a guest, Nina Rempel, who's the Marketplace Transition Project Manager, who's going to give us an update this morning.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share that the processing and call center that we're using, the vendor we're using is PH Tech, and they are the same vendor, but not the same call center as DHS. We are separate. And we are matching the hours of availability, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we've been open since April 13th, taking calls. Our processing center has been producing letters since April, that first week in April, when we received the first files. So we are taking questions by calls and emails, again, sending out letters. And we have a link there for our dashboard. So the transition notices that we're sending out to members losing OHP are giving them plan choices based on the information we're receiving from OHP at that time. Most letters are getting 2 plan choices for silver level plans because of cost sharing that is available on the silver level plans. Tribal members are getting the least expensive bronze option available to them. We are sending the letters out in the top 14 languages requested on OHP by the applications. And you can see samples of all the letters if you go to the transition website. And those sample letters, if you go to the assisters and agents link, they're at the bottom underneath the FAQs. This is a copy of our dashboard. It's updated almost daily as we get the files in and processed. The difference between the number of people referred to the marketplace and the number of people potentially eligible for marketplace is because whenever an OHP member goes in and updates their application, submits a change, they may still no longer be eligible. They're referred again to the marketplace, to the FFM, and we get that on the file. But we're only sending out a letter on the first notification that we get that a member is no longer eligible. So because OHP is sending out 2 or 3 notices, because healthcare.gov marketplace is sending out 2 notices, we just know that there's a lot of paper going out. The post office has got a lot of mail to deliver, and we know that notice fatigue is a real thing, and people stop opening. So we're only sending out the first notice the first time they get sent to healthcare.gov. But we will also, and I'll get into this later, be doing a second follow-up, but it's not by paper.
May I interrupt you? So the people that you get notified about are eligible for individual coverage. In other words, they wouldn't be someone who they determine live out of state or
Good question. Good question.
age 65 or something like that.
Right. We're actually eliminating people that have moved out of state. So if the information that comes to us from OHP shows that the person has attested that they're no longer in Oregon, we're not sending them a notice. For the people that are enrolled in Medicare, we are not sending them a notice. Though someone might be over the age of 65, we are sending them a notice because they may not have enough work credits to get that no cost Part A, and they are eligible for tax credits on the marketplace.
But a large portion of this population, as I understand it, may have group coverage eligibility. Do you scrub for that at all, or?
We don't, because we're not getting that information from OHP. Sure. So what are we hearing? The work is slow, but the work volume is slowly ticking up. Now that we are getting closer to that June 30 first closure date, so that's a good thing. PH Tech is focusing on quality assurance of letters and calls. We're also using them to do outreach. Partners and insurance agents are ready to be engaged in folks that are coming off of OHP, but they're just not, they're not getting a lot of people coming to them at this time. So with the fact that we are getting return mail, we are initiating outbound calls to people if their return mail indicates that they're not moved out of state, that their mail was not forwarded to another address in Oregon. PH Tech is making 3 attempts to try to connect with those folks to let them know and offer assistance at that time. Through these efforts, we've been able to get some address changes, and we've also been able to they've also been able to assist folks right then and there that wanted to have more information at that time. So that effort is showing some proof. The 30-day file from CMS. So again, as I mentioned, healthcare.gov is sending out a second notice to folks that don't seem to have taken any action to start an application with them. And once that second notice goes out, then we will get a file from CMS. With that file, we will attempt to reach folks by text, through an email bulletin in one of their preferred, in the preferred written language, and then also be making outbound calls to offer assistance for enrollment. So with House Bill 4035, we were provided monies to offer with grants, and we are going to be bringing on currently, we're bringing on 4 new community-based organizations to really do, to be available for assistance to many communities of focus that we're looking for. So we'll have more support in these communities listed here on the slide. These organizations plan to host information and education and enrollment events. They'll also be tabling at community events in their areas. And some of them have already asked if they can translate some of our materials that we may not have, but they want to provide more detailed information to their communities and are willing to do that translation. So that's good that they're really being proactive. We're also sending from the files that we're receiving from OHP, if the member had a previous relationship with one of our partner, a sister organizations, we're sending them a list weekly of those folks so they can do some direct outreach themselves, because we see that they've had that relationship and they have that authorization. So here are some of the things that our current community partner grantees are doing to for outreach to folks in the communities, so that they know that so they're just available to the communities, so that they have getting more information out. As well as our partner agents, they're also picking things up to get more information out. Normally, outside of the open enrollment period, agents kind of slow down and wait for folks to come to them. But with this, the transition period, with the redeterminations, they are putting out more information, being more available, and just letting people know to, to let them help. We are doing outreach to special groups such as employers and associations, and going to be looking into direct outreach to self-employed through the licensing agencies. So how can we help people that are losing OHP benefits? The things that we have listed here show you that there are other financial assistance programs available through not-for-profit hospitals and clinics. Also showing that they can get their information on plan options through the window shopping tool and referrals with our locator tool. This information is also listed in all of our letters that are going out, so folks have it if they don't choose to call us or reach us by email. They also have this information available to them. Yep. Are there any questions that I can answer?
There is one online.
Yes.
I know that you had said that there's a lot of information going out there and a lot of outreach. And I know that I'm one of the agents that I said, yes, I'm going to help. How can we as agents, how can we partner? How can we help get the word out Because I know that one of the slides in the slide deck did state that there hasn't been a whole lot of outreach, or we're not getting the calls. So how can we help get the word out and to start getting folks onto Marketplace? And I know that there's a process because they're not going to lose it right now. It's going to be probably 2 months down the line. So is there any way that we can help, or is there anything that we as agents can do to get that word out? Because beyond what y'all are doing.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And again, if you are, some folks, I don't know if they go to, like I've heard some agents go to farmers markets so that they're more readily available. But also with the new grantees that we have coming on board, and I know that we're stressing the fact that agents are the experts in plan and giving plan advice, and that they're not to advise, but they can just show options. I suppose if you're willing to be more cooperative with community partners, so that way they feel comfortable referring to you. What I'm really trying to do with our new organizations that are coming on board, we're going to give them a list of all of our partner agents and ask that they build some relationships. And so if if you want to try to create some kind of joint venture, yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
And I have done that in the past, actually, that when I first started 2013, I helped with more Oregon Health Plan applications than I did with Marketplace applications. But I built a great relationship with that community partner. And so once they started to return all the letters, then they're like, hey, can you help? So that definitely has helped in the past. So I think doing that again is going to be very helpful. Thank you for that reminder of partnerships, work together.
Great, thank you. Hi, Holly.
Just another quick example that I thought Gladys might like to hear as an example of collaboration. I know we as a community partner just this month collaborated with our local agents and a local clinic that has access to some of the EOCCO data, and sent out a countywide mailer to those members just to kind of let them know what help is available. So that was just an example of something we did this month.
Thank you for that.
In the letters that we're sending out to all of the members, we are actually including an insert of all of our partner assisters and all of our partner agents, so that folks have that separately, to keep on their table, to remind them that they need to call somebody, and then that way, if they don't find it on their phone, if they don't open up their laptop, they have that information available. So that was something that we felt was important to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nina. That was a great update. I think we're ready to move on then. We have our next public comment opportunity. So I'll open that up to public comment. Includes you, Rick.
I'm okay. Thank you, though.
You're good too. Okay. All right. Looks like we have a hand up. So.
It's and I'm just trying to recap what I heard this morning about the unwinding Oregon Health Plan. So the letter has been sent out, and the first batch would be in June. And then if the people who not qualify for Oregon Health Plan will go to the marketplace, and then by next year of July 1st, 2024, if the income is in between the 138 to or below 200% poverty guideline, they will move to the BHP Basic Health Plan. Is that what the plan is?
Oh, this is Chicky. Yes, that's the general outline of the plan.
But don't you think that's a little bit confusing to the consumer and to agent and everyone?
Yes, we anticipate there will be confusion, and there are going to be robust communication plans that I know are still being developed. Once we have that information, I would be happy to share. I think that's going to be definitely part of our July meeting. Once we have more details on how the communications will roll out, communications and outreach, we will definitely want Marketplace Advisory Committee input for those plans.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't think we have more public comments. So at this point, I think we'll get to the wrap up and closing. And since you may ask the question, I guess I'd open it up if there are other, since we have some time and we had a lot of on our agenda. Was there anything else that people wanted to go back to just to highlight that we might want to discuss in the future, or just any open questions? Still, yeah.
Did you have additional?
Oh, no, I'm good. Thank you. Sorry. I thought I hear my name, but I thought someone might just say, not my name. No, thank you, Greg. But I like what Holly Sorensen just says. If someone can connect me with the community partner so we can promote the unwinding. For myself, I have scheduled to speak with some Rotary clubs talking about unwinding on Medicaid redetermination. Thank you. No, nothing else. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Well, one topic that we did discuss, which I felt we wrapped up rather quickly, although it was a pretty dense topic, was the impact of the basic health plan on the marketplace and the lack of mitigation and potential loss of subsidies. So something that Chicky and I talked about during the break was whether there's interest in the committee to talk about, to follow up on that offline. Is there any interest? See a nodding head from Mary Beth about anybody online that was asking questions, or see a hand up.
Andrew.
Okay.
Andrew, go ahead.
Well, just agree. I would love to have more follow up on that, on mitigation.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And I think the other person who has his hand up is Andrew Stolfi.
Yep. Hi. I was going to talk about something else, but I would absolutely support as well more discussion on the basic health plan. But then I have something else to come back to when we're done with that.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So I think we have some ways to go about that. We've had marketplace community conversations. We've had specific carrier tables, I guess, like we did before. Yeah, or we could just probably want to do this in person. So I think something that maybe we'll take away is just how best to facilitate those follow-up discussions, and reach back out to the committee on how to do that. But rather than just put that on the agenda for July, we'll have something separate based on the interest, which I'm hearing and seeing. All right, with that, Andrew, why don't you tell us what you have for us?
Thanks. And I had to step away for a call, so maybe I'll just ask first, has anyone yet mentioned the 2024 health rates that were filed with DCBS?
Andrew, no, not yet.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
All right, great. Well, I'll put a link in the chat as well to table. I'll just share that about a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, we got the preliminary or initial rate filings from health insurers for the individual and small group markets. The link has all of that information, and we're seeing an average weighted statewide initial request in the individual market of 6.2%, which is lower than the initial request last year. We're diving into it and be happy at a future meeting to provide more information, but medical trend, pharmaceutical costs are of course the biggest drivers in that increase, but it is, as I said, smaller than the initial request we received last year. In small group market, it's 8.1%, which is a bit higher than the initial request last year. This is just the initial filing. We've got a several months long transparent public process. We'll have public hearings and plenty of opportunities for everyone to weigh in on this. I encourage anyone who's interested to go to our website, DCBS website, and submit testimony, opinion, whatever it might be. And we'd be happy to come back to a future meeting and give more information as well. But definitely wanted to share that news with the committee.
Yes, Mary Beth has a comment or a question.
Yeah, maybe more of a comment, but I think as the BHP becomes more real, and maybe DFR is already planning on doing this, but working with OHA on what those premium increases might look like next year as people are making the transition, I think would be really good information for this committee.
No, we're working we have been and will keep working very closely with OHA on that, and outside actuaries who are modeling impacts, as well as us trying to figure out what it might mean just for rates in general next year, as for the rate filings for next year as well. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good connection. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. That was an important update for everybody to know that those rates have been submitted, at least the preliminary rates. Good. Anything else for the good of the order? Well, not hearing anything, I do want to thank the Marketplace staff who gets us ready for this meeting. I do encourage you to come in person. Don provides treats. I've ate too much cookie just a minute ago, but so thank you, Don and staff. And the presenters who were here today, I appreciate that as well, and our new committee members. So hopefully this gave you a flavor for what these meetings are like. And with that, thank you, everyone. I think we can close the meeting.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.